Tian made a small sound, as if he had just remembered something in the back of his mind. The face that was wrapped under the layers of bandages inevitably reminded him of the child he had met 3 years ago. However, he wasn't completely sure. Pessimistically speaking, could that child still be alive 3 years after escaping from Mount Tian? Just then, the young boy came forward. He lifted himself up on tippy toes and swapped the flower on the clay statue with the one he had in his hands. From atop the altar, Tian could see it as clear as day. The petals on this new flower were fuller and more delicate. It carried twice as many dewdrops, and from the strong fragrance, one could be certain that it was freshly picked. Could it be that the sole reason that this boy visited an inconspicuous shrine like this every day was just to replace the flower with a fresher one? Moreover, after offering the flower, the young boy stood in front of the clay prince statue. Unlike the others who stubbornly wanted to kneel, he interlocked his fingers and silently made a prayer while standing. He had actually followed Tian's wishes. It had been 3 years. Amongst all of Tian's followers that had prayed, there were officials, nobles, names that travelled across this land, and talents that would even impress the heavens. Yet the one Tian felt was the most sincere was actually this child, who looked barely over 13. Furthermore, it was a child who had probably been kicked out of those fancier golden temples simply because of his patched clothing, and could only come to this kind of shabby, run-down shrine to offer his prayers. Truly an indescribable sentiment. Just then, more sounds of wet footsteps came from outside the shrine. A group of children with umbrellas rowdily ran past. At first, Tian thought that they were only passing by, but unexpectedly they circled back again, acting like they had discovered something extraordinary. One child clapped his hands. Wow, wow, the ugly monster got kicked out again. Even though the group of kids and the boy in the temple were all around the same age, every one of them was taller than him and looked as if their parents had fed them well. There was probably a holiday coming up, as all of them were dressed in new clothes and new shoes. As they playfully splashed around in the puddles by the shrine entrance, their innocent smiles were full of life and void of any ill intent. It was as if they didn't really understand that ugly monster were awful words, and didn't think that their own words would be hurtful. They probably thought that it was funny. The boy tightened his fist, but his fist was so small that it wasn't threatening at all. The kids by the door teased, "Hey, ugly monster, you sleeping in the shrine again tonight? Better watch out, that mom of yours is gonna beat the living hell out of you when you get home." Tian frowned. Under the wrapped bandages, the boy's one eye flashed with anger. He raised his fists and yelled, "I don't have a home. I don't have a mom. She's not my mom. Get out, get out. Keep talking, and I'm gonna beat the crap out of you." Yet the group of kids couldn't care less. They stuck out their tongues and challenged, "You dare? Careful, we might just tell your dad again and let him teach you a lesson." Some raised their brows and sneered. "Oh right, you don't have a mom because your mom didn't want you. You don't have a home because your family doesn't want anything to do with you. That's why you can only sleep in this pitiful shrine." The young boy couldn't endure it any longer. With a loud cry, he lunged at them. For such a scrawny kid, he sure could pack a punch. The loud cry had almost sent a couple of the kids running in fear, but the kid that had originally started the fight held his ground. What's there to be scared of? We have more people. Upon hearing that, the ones who wanted to run away returned and joined the fight, pulling at the boy's hands and feet. Tian finally couldn't stand it anymore. With a wave of his hand, an invisible force shot out of the blue and separated the boys. Immediately after, a powerful wave of puddle water flew up from the ground and knocked the group of children off their feet. In the end, they were still kids, after falling to the ground without knowing why and getting a whole mouthful of muddy water. Their new clothes were completely soaked. Now that they'd become even filthier and uglier than the kid they'd made fun of, the happy laughter from before was replaced with loud wailing. They crawled up from the ground and ran away sniffling with umbrellas in their hands. Tian shook his head in disappointment. As a proper martial god whose job was to ward off evil ghosts and bring protection and peace, this was the first time that he'd gotten tangled in this kind of juvenile dispute. Even though he had chased away the wrongdoers, he didn't feel accomplished at all. His gaze returned to the young boy. During that chaos, the bandages on the boy's head had been yanked off halfway. The half-revealed face was swollen with blue and purple bruises. It was obvious that these hadn't been caused by the brawl just now. Before Tian could get a better look, the boy had already rewrapped his bandages without a word. He sat down by the clay statue's feet and hugged his knees close. Tian had originally wanted to come to this Crown Prince shrine to think. He had planned on summoning Fengxin and Muqing to discuss an important matter. But the child that he had unexpectedly bumped into had drawn his attention. He sent out a summoning, then squatted down beside the boy and stared. Not long after, a rumbling sound came from the boy's stomach. The offering plate still had a couple of fruits and sweets. Although they looked dried out and probably wouldn't taste that good, it was better than nothing. Tian picked one and lightly tossed it toward the boy. Having gotten hit by the fruit, the young boy immediately wrapped his arms around his head and curled up defensively, as if the thing that hit him was a rock, and that it would be followed by more. After a while, he finally looked around and realized it was only a fruit, and that there wasn't anyone nearby. Hesitantly, he picked up the fruit, dusted it off twice against his clothes, and returned it to the offering plate. Turns out, he would rather endure the hunger than eat the offerings on the plate. After that, he walked toward the door and looked at the heavy downpour outside the shrine, as if debating whether to venture out to find food. However, the rain was coming down too hard. Since he didn't want to get soaked again, he walked back and curled up on the ground by the clay statue's feet. Just then, Fengxin and Muqing arrived after receiving the call. The two stepped out from behind the shrine. Fengxin gloomily said, "Your Highness, how did you find such a small Crown Prince shrine? Why did you send out a call from here?" When he looked down, he suddenly noticed a curled-up figure on the ground that he could have almost unknowingly stepped on, and blurted out, "What the hell is this kid doing here?" Muqing also looked down, took a good look, and immediately asked, "Your Highness, is this the child that ran away from Mount Tesang 3 years ago?" Tian shook his head. "I'm not sure. I didn't know what his name was, nor what he looked like." As the three surrounded the unsuspecting child and chatted, the boy on the ground shifted, As he wiped his face, Shilian realized that there was blood running down his nose and the corner of his mouth. Seeing this, Shilian felt he couldn't just do nothing. He said, "Let this child leave first. It's getting dark. The shrine isn't a good place to pass the night." Could it be that he has nowhere to go? If that's the case, then I'm afraid this is the only place that he could spend the night in, Fengxin said. He has a home, though the situation there might not be great, Shilian said. Even so, this shrine isn't any better. If he leaves, then we can find something for him to eat. He's also injured. Mu Qing spoke up. "Your Highness, please excuse my frankness, but we don't have time to bother with these minor things. Did you call us here because you've come to a decision?" Of all the heavenly officials who resided in the upper court, there had never been one that would accept every prayer from all of their devotees. With countless amounts of followers, if one was to care for every single one of them, it would be exhausting. Which was why, sometimes, they would turn a blind eye to those minor and less impactful wishes and pretend that they didn't hear, to lessen their workload. Maybe it was due to Shilian's young age, with a body bursting with energy and passion, that he had yet to learn about how to properly prioritize and work those things out. After some thought, he walked toward the entrance of the tiny shrine while carrying an umbrella that was gifted to him earlier by those pedestrians on the street. Shilian slowly opened the umbrella. The falling raindrops beat down on it, creating a pitter-patter sound. On the ground, the young boy heard the noise and thought that someone had entered and shifted slightly. But, after thinking no one would really bother with him, he laid back down again. Shilian placed the opened umbrella by the entrance. The young boy waited for the sound to disappear, but when it didn't, he sat up in suspicion to take a look. When he saw a red umbrella leaning against the ground under the rain, like a lonely crimson flower that had bloomed by itself, he froze in surprise. Watching the boy rushing forward to grab the umbrella, Mu Qing lectured, "Your Highness, you've done more than enough here. If you're too obvious and he finds out, it would be troublesome." Before Shilian could reply, the young boy ran back and shouted from behind them, "Your Highness." The three guards almost jumped in surprise and turned around. That boy, cradling the umbrella in his arms, had an eye that was reddened and filled with emotion. He lifted his head and shouted to the clay statue, "Your Highness, is that you?" Fengxin didn't know that Shilian had helped the boy chase away the other group of kids and had even chucked a fruit at him prior to this. He mused, "This kid is quite clever. He actually figured it out." Mu Qing, on the other hand, suspected that something must have happened before and eyed Shilian. The boy begged, "If you're here, please answer my one question." From his place high atop the altar, Shilian would hear countless pleas of "please appear before me" every day. When a sound becomes repetitive, it would numb the ear and eventually fade into the background. Even so, whenever he heard a voice like this, he couldn't help but drop matters at hand and perk up his ears. From his side, Mu Qing cautioned, "Your Highness, just leave it be." Shilian didn't speak. The young boy clutched onto the umbrella tightly with both hands, gritting his teeth. "I'm suffering. Every day I wish I'd die. Every day I want to kill off everyone in this world and then kill myself. I'm living in agony." From a boy that couldn't be older than 13, shouting words like suffering and killing off everyone sounded almost ridiculous and laughable. However, hidden inside this tiny body was something explosive, something that nurtured his rage and roars. Fengxin scoffed. What's wrong with him? Kill everyone in this world? Is that something a kid could say? Mu Qing said flatly, he's still young. When he gets older, he'll know that what he experiences now is really nothing much. After a pause, he looked at Shilian. There are too many people suffering in this world. Take Yong'an's drought, for example. Name one Yong'an citizen that has it better than him. There's no need to bother with this, Your Highness. Let's focus on our priorities. Shilian said softly, perhaps. To another, the suffering of one only looked like trivial problems. The boy was still looking up at the statue. His eye was becoming even redder, yet there were no tears. With the umbrella in one hand, he reached out with the other and tugged on the clay statue's robes. He persisted. What should I live for in this world? What does it mean to live? However, his questions were met by silence, not a soul to give answers. It seemed that the young boy had expected as much, and slowly dropped his head. To his surprise, suddenly, a voice from above broke through the dead silence. If you don't know how to live on anymore, then live for me. Next to Shilian, both Fengxin and Mu Qing had not expected him to actually answer, and such an answer too. Their eyes widened. Your Highness, they shouted. The young boy's head shot up, but there was no one there. Only a soft and gentle voice came from that clay statue. I have no answer to the question you ask. However, if you don't know the meaning of your life, then make me that meaning, and use me as your reason to live. Fengxin and Mu Qing's faces looked as if they were going to explode, and both reached out their hands to smother Shilian's mouth, sputtering, No more, Your Highness, you're violating the rules. The rules. But before they could fully cover up his mouth, Shilian managed to shout out, Thank you for your flower. It's beautiful. I like it very much.